Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is June the 4th, 155th day of the year. Just 210 days remain to the year's over with. Holidays and observances. National Cheese Day. National Hug Your Cat Day. Global Running Day. National Cognac Day, the National Corgi Day, Shopping Cart Day, National Old Maids Day, World's Day for Assistive Technology, and National Day of Innocent Children Victims of Aggression, National Safe Day, Audacity to Hope Day, National Christian T-Shirt Day, National Tailors Day, National Fishing and Boating Week, America the Beautiful Week, Medicare Fraud Prevention Week, National Commuter Challenge, National CPR and AED Awareness Week. Now let's see what we got in the news. All right. There's a new police chief of Dallas. He is bucking the sanctuary trend. He says he's going to do what's right. Democratic governor in Arizona ripped as a total disgrace after vetoing a bill limiting Chinese land ownership near military bases. Elon Musk is warning about the nation's plunge into debt slavery due to excessive spending. And when you figure that almost every single Democratic elected official is a multimillionaire, no matter how much they had when they went in office, there's way too much money flowing around. You know, Texas is ordered the renaming of the Navy ship that was named after a gay rights activist, USS Harvey Milk. LA court has ordered Trevor Bauer's accuser to pay him over $300,000 for violating the settlement. The accuser, Lindsay Hill, claimed on social media she's going to defy the judge's order. An illegal immigrant let in under Biden's open door policy. It was a nice container. Washington state authorities looking for a father wanted for the murder of his three daughters. Travis Decker, 32, is wanted on 3 counts of murder and kidnapping. Let's see what else we got. The prices hit new highs as cattle supply crashes. Diddy's returning to court as prosecution prepares to bring up a 2016 hotel attack on Cassie. Private sector added just 37,000 jobs in May. That's the lowest in over 2 years. A home in New Orleans has been raided after one of the jailbreakers apparently filmed a video that he sent to President Trump. A woman in the Czech Republic, declared dead by the coroner, woke up in her coffin, which is definitely strange. Family of the Boulder firebomber suspect taken into federal custody. Their visas have been revoked. Mohammed Sabri Soleiman's wife and 5 children are in federal custody. Michael Moore wants an alternative national pledge to fix and end the madness. Well, if we can get rid of some of the whack job producers, we might be able to do something. He wants people who read his Substack account to engage in daily acts of progressive political activism. translates as the anti-Trump actions. Fox News is outperforming the major networks as CNN hits its lowest ratings of the year. Diddy's defense attorney challenges the government's narrative in a high-stakes federal trial. Teeny Garregos says the case centers on adult choices, not sex trafficking. From California to Maine, trans athletes in girls' sports become a lightning rod for cultural conflict. Of course, the biggest state with trans athletes is California. Transgender athlete A.B. Hernandez of Jurupa Valley High School won the girls' triple jump and high jump state championships this past weekend. Number 2 on the list is Maine. It became ground zero for Trump's campaign to force Democratic leaders to comply with his executive order. There was a spat between him and Governor Janet Mills. Kash Patel has sounded the alarm as Chinese nationals were charged with smuggling agro-terrorism agents into the U.S. Bill Clinton is claiming he didn't see a cognitive decline in President Biden, but this is the same man who did not have sex with that woman. All right. Prince Harry is deep in the family rift by reportedly considering a name change. Duke of Sussex is talking about adopting the Spencer name as opposed to the Windsor name. Federal judge, God's anointed, dismissed criminal charges against an Atlanta police officer for death during an arrest operation. The ruling says the evidence for self-defense was overwhelming. Let's see. Florida officials have rejected a individual selected to be president of the University of Florida. They were past DEI statements. Apparently, he's a big DEI supporter. White House hits back a Democratic mayor who sued the U.S. attorney over the ICE arrest. Interim U.S. Attorney for New Jersey, Lena Haba, called on the mayor to feel free to join in prioritizing violent crime and public safety. It's the Newark Democratic Mayor, Ras Baraka, who has sued the interim U.S. Attorney after he was arrested and charged with criminal trespass last month. He's the one that started the brawl outside the ICE facility. The Cruz's rapid return to television has sparked debate. Democrats are calling for the acting FEMA chief to be fired after saying unaware that the U.S. had a hurricane season. That comment been called a joke by the White House. Jake Tapper, who was beating the drum over his book, apparently is not aware that CNN played a major role in what he calls a smear machine against her and the Wall Street Journal over Biden. Her's the one that said Biden was a senile little man with a poor memory. Now little Jolie is taking a bold step with a new stage name, Drop the Pit, after the parents' divorce. Pamela Bach Hasselhoff's death has been ruled a suicide, according to the medical examiner. Ex-Democrat warns the party is dying as Fetterman breaks ranks on a number of key issues. Record-breaking sargassum invasion in the Atlantic and the Caribbean has threatened the beaches. But will, of course, damage tourism. A man tried to break into Mar-a-Lago. He wanted to marry Trump's granddaughter. And he thought that was the way to do it. The Trump's iPhone background is driving left liberal virgins crazy. Alphabeta, Soy Boy, Virgin Libs are throwing temper tantrums because they're just now realizing Donald Trump likes some Donald Trump. It's a lot of lunatics out there. Popular home decor retailer is preparing to file for bankruptcy. That's the At Home store. I never see anybody there. There's one not too far from where I live. FDA's approved the first AI tool that predicts breast cancer risk from mammograms. All right. Well, that took care of the news. Let's talk about our main topic, which is spontaneous human combustion is what we're talking about today. That's where somebody just goes up in smoke. Well, there's a story about a 70-year-old Herbert Shen of Camp Chaffee Road in Forest Park, California. March 26, 1965. Friend went to visit him and found him in the kitchen with severe burns to his chest, back, and spine. Died 30 minutes later at the local hospital. He'd been alone when the friend discovered him. Investigators found absolutely no evidence of fire anywhere in his house or in his yard. Nothing in his house had been burned, but he died from the severity of flames that reached him from some invisible source. Let's go to December 1956. It's Virginia Coggett, 11:30. On Nakia Street in Honolulu, Hawaii. Walked into the room of young sick Kim, a 78-year-old cripple, to find him enveloped in flames. By the time the firemen got there, Kim and his easy chair were ashes. Strangely enough, the nearby clothing were untouched by fire. In spite of the fierce heat that would have been necessary to actually consume a human being. December 1965, Ms. Catherine Elizabeth Charles discovered on fire in the living room of her apartment at 210 Liberty Street in Oneida, New York. Edward Wilcoxon lived in the same building, burned his hand trying to get her out of the flames. August 19th, 1966, Doris Lee Jacobs of Oceano, California, burned to death in her trailer home at 1342 23rd Street. Although she suffered burns, over 95% of her body, the inside of the trailer was only partially scorched. Officials couldn't offer any explanation for the fire because it was the woman, not the trailer, that had burst into flames. You have to wonder what force brings about the deadly blue tongue of fire that actually consumes human beings. How can human flesh be heir to such dangers as spontaneous combustion? Normally, spontaneous combustion is confined to ornery rags and newspapers piled up in poorly ventilated corners of basements and garages. It's a little disconcerting to consider that human beings might suffer that same fiery fate as stacks of oily rags thrown in a corner. Let's go to September 20th, 1938. Chelmsford, England. Woman burst into flames in the middle of a crowded dance floor. The wife was able to put out the fire that seemed to be fed by her own flesh, and in minutes she was nothing but a heap of ashes. Going to the coroner, Leslie Beckles, all his experience, he'd never come across any case as mysterious as this one. Seems to be a little question that women are most often the victims of spontaneous human combustion or preternatural combustibility. July 30th, 1937, a woman had been paddling about on a small boat with her husband and children at England's Norfolk Broads was engulfed by blue flames. In a matter of a few terrifying moments, she became nothing but a mound of ash. Neither a member of her family nor the wooden boat itself was harmed. Charles Fort, who wrote some fascinating books, considered spontaneous human combustion and remarked, I think that our data relate not to spontaneous combustion in human bodies, but to things or beings that with a flaming process consume men and women, but like werewolves or alleged werewolves, mostly pick out women. In his book, Look, he talked about a few incidents. Barbara Bell, 77, was found on the sofa with her body burned as if it had been a long time in the middle of an intense heat. Miss Thomas Cochran of Rose Hall, Falkirk, England, was discovered burned almost beyond recognition, but her charred body was surrounded by pillows and cushions that didn't show the slightest sign of fire. Elizabeth Clark was found covered with burns in an unscorched bed. Dr. B.H. Hartwell of Ayer, Massachusetts, was called to observe the crouched form of a woman being consumed by flames that were coming from her own flesh. Dr. D.J. Gee, a lecturer in forensic medicine at the University of Leeds in England, wrote about a case of spontaneous human combustion for the journal Medicine, Science, and the Law. This was January 1965 issue. According to Dr. Gee, the victim was a slim, 85-year-old woman who lived with her son and daughter-in-law in a ground floor apartment. Family left the apartment at 9:30 in the morning on the day she died. Neighbors discovered smoke coming from the kitchen window and found the smoldering remains of a human body on the hearth. When Dr. Gee visited the apartment 2 hours later, he noted the room was extremely warm and the ceiling felt hot. Paintwork was blistered and the walls and furnishings were covered with soot. Only a part of the wooden edge of the hearth was burned, and a small section about a foot in diameter of the floor was damaged. The rug hadn't been burned, but it was greasy with tiny fragments of fat. A tea towel lying nearby where the body was found was barely singed, and a large pile of dry firewood remained unaffected. After his examination, Dr. Gee determined that the woman must have suffered a heart attack and fallen into the fire. He said the appearances suggested that the body was ignited at the head by the fire, of which a few cinders remained, and sufficiently inflammable to burn to this degree without any other source of heat, like a candle. The draught from the chimney prevented the spread of the flames to other parts of the room. In a 1961 study by Dr. Gavin Thurston, after a review of the literature about spontaneous human combustion, and he came to a number of conclusions. Number one, under certain conditions, the body will burn in its own fat with little or no damage to surrounding objects. Number two, the combustion is not spontaneous, but started by an external source of heat. And number three, this has occurred when the body's been in the path of a draft up the chimney from a lighted fire. Oxygenation is good, and the flow of the flue prevents outward spread of the fire. Well, in order to test Dr. Thurston's theories, Dr. Gee conducted some experiments. He learned that human body fat, when melted in a crucible, will only burn at a temperature somewhere near 250 degrees centigrade. However, cloth wick prepared in liquid fat will burn even when the temperature of the fats dropped as low as 24 degrees centigrade. Dr. Gee also enveloped a layer of human fat in several layers of thin cloth in order to produce a roll about 8 inches long. Combustion of that roll proceeded slowly along its length, burning with a smoky yellow flame and producing a great deal of soot. Both of these experiments, a fan was arranged so the combustion would proceed in the direction opposite the flow of air. Dr. Gee admitted that these experiments are by no means conclusive, but he argued they support the theory put forward by Dr. Thurston, which seems the most reasonable explanation for the occurrence of these curious phenomena. But a reasonable explanation doesn't always fit the circumstances and the facts of the situation. Joan Hart found her invalid sister Mary sitting in a parlor rocking chair literally covered in flames. She snatched up a throw rug and wrapped it around Mary in order to smother the flames. And somehow Joan managed to carry her sister upstairs, where she put the badly burned woman on a bed with clean sheets. While Joan went to fetch help, Mary caught on fire again. When Joan arrived with a doctor, Mary had been reduced to ashes, with the exception of her head and some fingers. Amazingly, the bedclothes weren't damaged in any way. There was only the strange coating of greasy soot that's reported in so many of these cases. April 7th, 1969, Ms. Grace Walker, 60 years old, of 5324 Cedar Avenue in Long Beach, California, was found on the floor of her living room with burns covering 90% of her body. Although she was still alive when she was discovered, she was pronounced dead when she got to the hospital. Investigating police officers said the only signs of fire in the house were the ashes left from Ms. Walker's clothes, which had been burned from her body by the flames coming from her flesh. There were no burners on the stove, and not a single match was to be found in Ms. Walker's house. Friends and relatives said that the woman didn't smoke and never carried matches on her person. In 1960, Ms. Louis Matthews of South Philadelphia survived an eerie experience that might offer an explanation for at least some of the mysterious cremations that have taken place throughout the world and, frankly, throughout all recorded time. She said she was lying on her living room sofa when she glanced up to see a large red ball of fire come through both closed windows and the Venetian blinds without harming either one. At first, she thought that an atomic bomb had fallen, and she buried her face in the sofa. But that ball of fire passed through the living room into the dining room and drifted out through a closed dining room window. She said it made a sizzling noise as it floated through her house. She called her husband at work and told him the strange tale and asked him to come home at once. He may have thought his wife was overwrought about something and had some very vivid dreams and imagined the whole episode, but when he walked through the front door, he began to cry. He said Mrs. Matthews exhibited visible proof of her experience. When he left for work that day, his wife had a full head of hair. And when he walked in the door, she was half bald. According to Ms. Matthews, she had felt a tingling sensation in the back of her head as that ball of fire passed over her. When she felt the spot with her hand, her hair had fallen out, leaving her scalp as smooth and as clean as her face. And even though her hair is a woman's crowning glory, Ms. Rose House, 74, of New Braintree Road in Barre, Massachusetts, would have been most willing to sacrifice her hair in order to escape the horrible fiery fingers that engulfed her June 16, 1960. Alerted by her greatest screams, Mr. and Ms. Arthur Drake, who lived upstairs in her home, ran down to find Ms. Howe's clothing aflame from the waist up. Investigators couldn't find any reason why Ms. Howe suddenly became a living torch. Letter from a surgeon, Stephen Power of the Royal Homeopathic Hospital in London, to the Journal of the British Medical Association. Talked about a real-life flamethrower. According to Dr. Power, every time a certain British minister bent to blow out altar candles, his breath would catch fire. Now, that might be momentarily advantageous to breathe a bit of fire and brimstone into one's sermons. It certainly is an awkward condition to be lighted with on a extended basis. Dr. Connor informed his colleagues that the cause was found to be a buildup of inflammable gas in the passenger's stomach caused by duodenal ulcer. After an operation, the surgeon wrote the person was able to carry out his duties in a more decorous fashion. Now, of course, there's no suggestion that all the unfortunate victims we've talked about have been tragically ignited by a buildup of inflammable gas in their own stomachs, but there are records of individuals who seem to contain their own individual self-contained flamethrower. Glasgow News, Glasgow, Scotland, May 20th, 1878, reported a series of bizarre fires in farmers' haystacks that always seemed to occur when a certain 12-year-old girl passed by. She was never seen to go near the haystacks, but she never needed to touch them. Human mind may be capable of focusing enough raw energy on both material and flesh to cause them to burst into flames. There's another story from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, December 1891. 14-year-old girl named Jenny Bramwell was seen to go into trance, and by pointing at ceilings or walls, she could cause them to crackle and blaze with fire. Investigators in Budapest, Hungary, talked about a 13-year-old boy who slept with strange blue flames dancing around his bed. In 1929, there was a teenage girl in the West Indies who simply couldn't be kept in clothing. If she put a new dress on, it would begin to smolder and burn. She ordered to receive the oldest bed sheets because you never knew when her bedclothes might catch fire upon contact with her flesh. Now, she herself never had burns on any part of her body, but she could certainly burn up what was around her. During a visit to Memphis, Tennessee in 1927, Vice President Dawes encountered a repairman who demonstrated his uncanny ability to ignite a handkerchief simply by breathing on it. And recently, there were a number of news clips concerning a certain Brian Clements of Harrow, England. He was able to build a tremendous electrical charge in his body. He can become so hot during the day, he must touch a grounded metal pole the moment he comes back home so he can kiss his wife and children without endangering them. If he were to hug him before he had expelled the pent-up electrical energy in his body, he might do their enormous electrical jolts to them. Carter of Wales, Brian Williams, was said to be able to cause neon tubes to glow big by grasping the terminals in his hands. And a former professor at the Polytechnic Institute of Brooklyn has set up a consulting firm designed to locate hot employees. That's those who may endanger certain industries by their ability to absorb and discharge large jolts of static electricity. Professor Robin Beach states that his studies led him to estimate that about 1 in 100,000 people have this capability. Again, it seems quite unlikely any of these bizarre instances of spontaneous human combustion could have been caused by a gigantic spark of some static electricity generated or stored up by the victim's own body. Even such a massive jolt of electricity as that contained in a lightning bolt could hardly cremate a human body, as victims of spontaneous human combustion have been consumed. In some of these cases, there have been nothing left of the unfortunate individuals but a heap of ashes. And just what type of heat has to be generated to reduce a human body to such a state in a matter of minutes, or at most a few hours? According to an article on spontaneous human combustion in True magazine, Ellen Eckert discussed the experiments of Dr. William Krogman, a professor of physical anthropology at the University of Pennsylvania. He did these experiments about the effects of fire on flesh and bone. He tested bones still encased in human flesh. He tested bones devoid of flesh, but not yet allowed to dry out, and bones that have been dried. He burned cadavers in a wide variety of fires fed by such combustibles as hickory and oak, gasoline, oil, coal, and acetylene. In answer to Eckert's question, how hot a fire has to be to totally destroy a human body, Dr. Krogman replied, first and foremost, it takes a terrific heat to completely consume a human body, both flesh and skeleton. He watched a body in a crematorium burn at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for over 8 hours, burning under the best possible conditions of both heat and combustion with everything controlled. In the end of that time, there was scarcely a bone that was not still present, completely recognizable as a human bone. It was calcined or reduced to its original matrix, but it was not ash or powder. Only at over 3,000 degrees has he seen the bone fuse so that it ran and became volatile. These are very great heats that would affect anything flammable within a considerable radius of the blaze. That being said, how could a human being burn beyond recognition in a number of cases in less than an hour, and not cause the fire to spread beyond the chair in which they were sitting or in the small area of the floor in which they might have sprawled? According to Dr. Krogman, the temperature required to bring about such immolation would ignite and consume anything capable of burning within a considerable radius of the blaze. It has become a classic case of spontaneous human combustion as Mary Reeser of St. Petersburg, Florida, was last seen relaxing comfortably in an armchair in her apartment at 9 p.m. on a Sunday evening. When a telegram was delivered to her 11 hours later, nothing remained of the 170-pound woman but a shrunken skull, one vertebra, and a left foot, wearing the charred remains of a black slipper. Mary Fuller, editor of Fate magazine, did a rundown on the case, derived from clippings and research supplied by readers in the St. Petersburg area. When the bizarre factors involved in the July 2nd, 1951 case, Ms. Fuller noted the windows in Ms. Reeser's apartment were open all night, but nobody smelled or saw any smoke. The apartment itself, though unbearably hot, was almost completely unscathed. The room was coated in oily soot about above a 4-foot line only. The armchair, lamp, chair-side table, and small portion of the carpet directly beneath the armchair were destroyed, but nothing else was damaged. It's known to require a temperature of over 3,000 degrees to completely consume a human body. Ms. Reeser's skull was shrunk to the size of a baseball, but in all known cases of intense heat, the skull expands, sometimes even exploding. So, literally, none of this made any sense. Fire Chief Nesbitt said he had never seen anything like it in all his years of investigating fires. Edward Davies, arson agent for the National Board of Underwriters in Tampa, Florida, said, "We don't know that it was a fire. We just don't know what could have caused it." Spokesman for a St. Petersburg mattress company pointed out there wasn't enough material in any overstuffed chair to create a human body. Cotton, he said, comprises the basic stuffing of a chair like that, and this material is often combined with felt, hair, or foamable cushions. One of these materials is capable of bursting suddenly into violent flame, although they do possess properties that enable them to smolder for long periods of time. Dr. Krogman remarked that he couldn't conceive of such a complete cremation without more objects having caught fire and burned in the apartment. It was established that a heat of 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit is necessary to completely consume the bones, as happened in the Reeser case. As that woman was burned elsewhere and remains placed in that apartment, Dr. Krogman said he was baffled and amazed. First, he thought that a super lightning bolt may have struck Ms. Reeser. The body served as a conductor to ground the current through a wall-type heater behind the chair. He discarded that theory as soon as he learned the local weather bureau record showed no lightning in St. Petersburg on the night Ms. Reeser met her fate. He later said, "I've never seen a skull so shrunken or a body so completely consumed by heat. This is contrary to normal experience, and I regard it as the most amazing thing I've ever seen." As I review it, he said, the short hairs on his neck brittle with vague fear. When I lived in the Middle Ages, I'd mutter something about black magic. Police Chief J.R. Reckert, out of an FBI report, stating there's no evidence of any kind of inflammable fluids, volatile liquids, chemicals, or other solvent that might have been used to set the wooden's body on fire. Spontaneous human combustion seems to strike without warning, without leaving a clue. It seems to occur primarily in the elderly and among women. There's no standard rule for these grim cases of preternatural combustibility. Every theory, such as those who imbibe heavily, may be more susceptible to the burning death, but that's been disproved and rejected. At this point, no investigator really seems to know exactly what set of circumstances might bring a body cells to the critical stage at which they might spontaneously burst into flames that feed on the body's own fatty tissue. We just have to face the grisly fact that spontaneous human combustion might occur to anybody. There's no rhyme, no reason. Well, for spontaneous human combustion, let's talk about spook lights and fire devils. The night of January 4th, 1967, a J.W. Curley family of Indio, California was asleep on the top floor of the old two-story Southern Pacific Railroad building. They didn't have any advance warning. The old depot was to catch fire that night and burn to the ground. Mr. Curley was able to rouse his family and take them all outside unhurt, and he also would have been unscathed had he not re-entered the flaming building to make sure that no other men were inside. He suffered burns over 2/3 of his body for his effort, but in due time he was able to return to his job. When the ashes had cooled and he was back at his desk, there were 3 puzzling mysteries connected with the blaze that none of the Curleys could explain. First, when they opened the family safe, they discovered blackened, melted, and fused coins. But somehow the birth certificates of daughters Cheryl and Sharon, 18-year-old twins, had escaped the heat and the flames. Those certificates were intact, weren't even singed. Second, the day after the fire, a picture of the baby David was returned to the Curleys. Though the flame and the glass were gone, the photograph wasn't even scorched. And third, the most inexplicable of all, when Curley returned to work, he found the shoes that he had set at his bedside on the night of the fire and be waiting for him alongside his desk. The leather didn't show any signs of flames, and he was at a loss to explain how they got there. Well, the story of the Curley's fire shows one of the strangest twists fires can take. Recorded instances of fires that mysteriously avoid certain articles and all else was reduced to ashes. Fires that break out in one corner of the room that seem to choose only certain items for destruction. Flames that arise due to mysterious fireballs. And stranger still, fireballs that leap and bounce about rooms without causing any damage. Might be interesting to speculate on the motivation behind the fire that broke out in the Dresden East German Public Library in December 1968. The fire was restricted to just 14 shelves, which were totally demolished. Inches away, volumes under different classification were unscathed. Which books were concerned? Well, the library's complete collection of books on witchcraft and the black arts. It makes it look like perhaps some repentant witch trying to discourage future followers of her trade. Now, the inexplicable fire occurred in the Charles H. Williamson house in Leadenboro, North Carolina on a January morning in 1932. Ms. Williamson's dress suddenly burst into flames. A husband and a teenage daughter tore the burning dress off her body, and all had recovered from their fear. They were astonished to see that Ms. Williams' body was unharmed. Father and daughter gazed at their own hands in stupefaction. They didn't have any burns, blisters, or even the slightest red tinge. Fires that occur within a building or a home are commonly blamed on electrical difficulties, flammable cleaning fluids, stoves, ovens, and escaping gas. Peculiar fires sleep around outdoors are usually blamed on electrical or heat lightning, other natural phenomena, or in cases where a fire seeming evidence of blaze is found to overworked imaginations. But the people of Tucson, Arizona found just enough evidence to prove that they'd witnessed a fire that of some sort, and but not enough to be convinced that they'd actually viewed an ordinary fire. It was the night of February 8, 1955. A huge fire in the Santa Catalina Mountains was observed from the streets of downtown Tucson. As people gathered to watch, men in the crowd estimated the flames were climbing up to about 50 feet. And the blaze continued for nearly 8 hours. Next day, a search party composed of deputies and air rescue teams and newsmen moved up into the mountains in search of the site of the disaster. Finally, they located the area about 3,700 feet up the mountain. They knew they had the right spot, but there was almost no indication of a blaze, and certainly none that could be the results of the signs of the fire they'd watched the night before. The only clue was that large rocks scorched black that jutted out of the landscape. No patches of ashes anywhere, and there were no corroborating charred remains left from whatever the burning object was. Now, something had definitely burned in the Santa Catalina Mountains, though for the cactus all around that had crystallized and the ground in the vicinity, which was mostly covered with rock, found to be scorched 3 or 4 inches deep. So something extremely flammable that burned in the mountains, but whatever it was, nobody had any idea. Another fire phenomena that continues to confound the experts is ball lightning. Several interesting conclusions have been reached, but as yet no convincing solutions. Dr. Leonard Reifel, a syndicated science writer, made an appeal to his readers in 1967 for personal experiences with ball lightning. And for their responses, reported in Fate magazine in May of 1968, Raphael confirmed that the size of ball lightning seems to range from about golf ball size up to 3 or 4 feet across, more common being described as the size of a basketball or a grapefruit. He also confirmed that a number of people have seen a foul ball come through a closed window. At first, the ball seen hovering outside the window, and within seconds, the spear manages to materialize on the other side of the glass. He speculated this ability may be an electrical phenomenon if the ball passes through a screen, metal being a good electrical conductor. Blue balls of fire began harassing residents of Joliet, Illinois during a peculiar thunderstorm, March 21st, 1916. Fireballs remained after the storm and during an unspecified period of time broke 20 windows in a residential district of the town. A professor at Northwestern University declared the blue balls were bolides, resulting from 2 kinds of electricity coming together. A government meteorologist in Chicago flatly disagreed with him when he said he didn't quite see how a bolide could break a window. Others, less endowed with scientific minds, let it go as an act of God. Some of the broken windows turned a peculiar burned color, though no research seems to have been done on this aspect that provided any clues for such a manifestation. And not too many years ago, lightning balls were classified with UFOs owing to the similarity of their movements. Now, ball lightning has become worthy of scientific investigation. UFO research remains, shall we say, on the extreme fringes of respectability. So as lightning balls become respectable, they were exploited as the explanation for a strange light phenomenon. Science has found a scapegoat for something they previously preferred to ignore. Lightning balls were indicted for terrorizing Mary Jimenez and her mother late the summer of 1923. Mary suffered a bout with chicken pox, so she and her mother were sleeping in the downstairs guest room to eliminate the need for running up and down the stairs. The rest of the family slept upstairs on the other side of the house. Mary was sleeping peacefully, the worst of the disease having spent itself, when suddenly she was awakened by a bright finger of light probing into the room. It swished across the open window, and it was joined by another beam of the same light. Together, these 2 beams swished in a scissors movement as they swept across the yard and along the side of the house. Well, Mary's mother woke up as well, and both mother and daughter watched, paralyzed with fear as the 2 lights walked sentry duty over their house. Never had we seen anything as bright or as eerie, she wrote in March of 1968 issue of Search magazine. The light fell from some point directly above the house and kept up its switching back and forth as though searching for something. What struck both women as odd was the fact that the lights illuminated nothing but what was in their path. The area outside the shafts of light was in total darkness, and that's what frightened them most of all. It suggested some intelligence behind these lights. And just as suddenly as they had turned on, the lights suddenly turned off. Shouting their alarm, Mary and her mother made for the stairs in record time, calling loudly for Mary's father and the rest of the family. The men were able to do little more than calm the willing spectators of the light. They couldn't unearth anything to solve the mystery. The source of the beams couldn't have been a dirigible because they heard no sounds of a motor, and aircraft of that day wouldn't have hovered over the house for so long. Couldn't have been a balloon because the shafts of light were strong and unwavering. The balloon would have been susceptible to wind currents. And they couldn't have been the beacon lights in the new airport at Toledo because the lights came straight down from above. Of Ford DeMary, no land-based tower and beacon made those lights. So what were these shafts of light? Where'd they come from? In the little town of, New Mexico, residents made a connection between the strange bouncing lights seen along the river and the flying rocks that harassed the Quintanas family. Those phenomena put in an appearance about the middle of July in 1966. Attacked by shower of rocks, the Quintanas family sought help from their neighbors, and the police were called in. Felt it was thought to be a teenage prank, but then the lights were seen. Lights were described as being the size of golf balls and bluish or grayish in color. They resembled a beam of a flashlight, except they bounced along the river much higher than a man's head and disappeared into the trees. Barbed wire fences separate small fields in that area, even crossing the river. It didn't take long for the Quintanas to realize if the lights were caused by teenagers, the pranksters would have run along the riverbank and across the fence. No pause in the movements of the lights, though. So were the hostile rocks connected in any way with the bouncing lights? Regardless of the connection, you have to ask yourself what was behind both phenomena. And some of the spookiest lights on records are the ones linked popularly to ghosts and their haunting grounds. The little town of Silver Cliff in the Wet Mountain Valley of Colorado, ghost lights have plagued the local cemetery since 1880. Silver Cliff is itself almost a ghost town. In 1980, it boasted a population of 5,087. Today, it only has 217 inhabitants. And that was at the time I did the research, so it's probably got less than that today. Ghost lights reached the mass media in the spring of 1956 in the Wet Mountain Tribune on August 20th, 1967 in the New York Times. Local folklore has it the lights were first seen in 1880 by a merry group of miners passing by the cemetery. They saw the flickering blue lights over the gravestones thereafter died away, and they left the area in a hurry. Since then, the light's been observed by generations of tourists and residents of Custer County. They've noted that the curious blue lights can't be seen as clearly on the sandstone markers. This convinced several spectators the lights were only a reflection of house lights in the valley. According to County Judge August Menzel, that wasn't the case. The New York Times every counted tonight that everybody in Silver Cliff and nearby West Cliff shut off their lights. Even with the street lights turned off, the graveyard lights still danced. The ghostly grave markers can't be attributed to the reflection of ordinary house and municipal lights. The question becomes, what can they be? Old-timers and younger theorists have come up with a lot of suggestions. They believe to be reflections from the stars, but the lights are just as clear on a starless, moonless night as they are when their stars are out. They're believed to be caused by phosphorescent ore and glowing wood, but the darker the night, the brighter the lights. Suggested radioactive ores were causing these flickering lights, but Geiger counters were employed to cover the entire area and no radioactivity was discovered. So the eternal scapegoat of a teenager's pranks was adopted. When the graves were checked for luminescence, none was found. Finally, scraping the bottom of the barrel suggested the graves reflected the mercury vapor of the West Cliff streetlights. But during a power failure, the lights remained undimmed. And finally, those who searched for plausible explanations confessed their total bafflement. None of the theories would hold water. The lights could never be approached for a close enough look. As soon as somebody got too near, the lights would disappear only to pop up again in another section of the cemetery. So photographers were brought in, but nobody managed to capture the elusive blue lights on film. At this point, the old-timer simply smiled, gathered a few children around him, and provided a fitting explanation for a classic ghost story. According to these men, the cemetery, which is still in use, became the final resting place of many miners who died while mining precious ores. The flickering lights of the graveyard resembled the little lights worn on miners' hats, and the old men in town say the lights belonged to the restless souls of the miners who were still searching for the gold they never found. Well, even if this explanation is only a fairy tale, the ghostly blue lights of Silver Cliff are no fantasy. You can still see them today. Four more notorious ghost lights located in the tri-state area of Spooksville in the corner of Missouri, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. Spooksville ghostly lights have advertised as a tourist attraction and brings in countless hordes of curious tourists who are weary of visiting Civil War battlegrounds on their vacations. The mysterious light, known variously as lights in the sky, spook lights, and ghost lights, the visitors and inhabitants of the region has been officially dubbed a UFO by the U.S. Air Force. This alone has caused the Spookville area to be called the UFO airport. In appearance, the ghost light resembles a bright lantern. Often the light's dimmed before spectators and then bounces back over the mountains in a brilliant blaze of light. Hundreds of first-hand encounters with the mysterious ghost lights are on record. These accounts demonstrate actual experiences with the unknown, sometimes frightening, but always interesting. In World War II, the U.S. Corps of Engineers scoured that entire area using the latest scientific equipment. For weeks, they tested caves, mineral deposits, highway routes, and exhausted every possible explanation for the origin of the mystery lights. Finally, they gave up and left. Louise Graham reported coming home on a school bus from a school carnival in Hudnall, Oklahoma. A ghost light perched on the rear window of the bus was as though attempted to enter. Everybody on the bus was thoroughly frightened, except for the women who began screaming. Louise told her story in a pamphlet called Ghost Lights, put out by Bob Lofton. The light was so bright, she said, it temporarily blinded the bus driver and he had to stop the bus. When we stopped, the light went away. Chester McMahon of Quapaw, Oklahoma, wrote his story in Ghost Lights as well. He explained that when the weather got terribly hot, he liked to do his plowing in the evening. Seems the old light felt real neighborly one night and decided to help him with the plowing. I couldn't see too well, and I guess the old light sensed it because it started hovering all over the field while I was plowing. He thought it was a good idea until the light suddenly darted in his direction. Said he absolutely froze stiff on the tractor. The light, understanding his fear, sailed off out of sight. Other experiences with the light, even more hair-raising, described the light appearing outside a car, hesitating and materializing on the inside of the car. Some of the locals have a hard time believing that one, but more than one person has told it. There are many more ghost light hauntings, the nooks and crannies, mountain peaks and valleys on this planet. So far, all attempts at scientific explanation have been unsuccessful. Experts have tried to explain the phenomenon by using the existing structures of physics. Maybe forever to truly understand these mysterious fires and lights, it would be necessary to go outside the existing structure to find the answers. There are strange lights that can't be said to be the property of an existing or still to be discovered physics. There are lights that seem to shine directly from the psychic world, transcending this material earth plane. One such light was seen by Flora Shaw on an otherwise dark night in Atlanta, Georgia. It was April 15, 1918, tax day. Young Flora was asked by her grandmother, with whom she and her mother lived, to take the axe and go chop some dead pine. I can't finish dinner until I got more wood to put on the fire. Well, the girl said, Grandmother, it's too dark to even see any wood to chop. Well, her grandmother started to be strict with the girl and said, you just get started, Flora, and I'll be right along with the lantern. And I'm grateful for any assistance she could get. Flora headed out the door with the axe and found a limb, just beginning to chop when the whole yard lit up as though it was a bright day. She turned to look for her grandmother, but the old woman wasn't there yet. The girl looked toward the top of the illuminating pines and saw something that resembled a statue moving across the sky coming from the east. When Flora let out a shriek, and her grandmother ran to the girl's side, and together they watched the aerial phenomena for almost 10 minutes. When it disappeared, the yard was still bathed in brilliant light. Gradually, that began to fade as well, rolling up like a scroll in the eastern sky. According to Flora, it must have been an angel. And then grandmother said, look, coming from your bedroom. Well, the girl watched in wonder and fright as a fireball came out of the bedroom she and her mother shared. Slowly it circled the house and wended its way down the path the young girl's mother traveled to and from work. Immediately after the fireball disappeared, the three family dogs started to howl. They got up under the house where they'd been lying and followed the same path the fireball had taken. On that day, the girl's mother had been in good health and at work. 2 weeks later, April 26, 1918, she was dead from double pneumonia. So what was that strange light and mysterious statue they saw that night? Laura Shaw and Bertha Bowers believed it was the angel of death. Similar lights were at play early in the 1900s in the Willamette Valley of Oregon. It was June of 1968 issue of Fate magazine where Molly Myers told the story of her mother, Laura Jeanette. Several times a year, Laura and her husband loaded up the wagon, hitched up the horses, and made the 2.5-mile trip to town. There they traded farm produce for staples. This particular occasion, her usual autumn trip had been delayed owing to the illness of Laura's husband and the already winter when they decided to make the decision to go. When they'd finished their trading in town, they stopped off for supper with some relatives, and during the course of the meal, Laura's husband became violently ill. Relatives insisted he stay the night. Laura agreed that'd be a good plan. But she couldn't think of remaining with him and leaving the 5 children home alone to worry. Telling everybody she'd send her 2 oldest boys the next morning to pick up their father, she began that 2.5-mile trip back home by herself. When she got out onto the road, she discovered it was pitch black and began to fear she wouldn't be able to see it all, and her thoughts strayed to the reports of a wild cougar had been molesting cattle in the area. So to forestall her fears, she began to pray. A safe and peaceful feeling began to spread over her when suddenly a light appeared in front of the horses, illuminating the road ahead. She breathed a sigh of relief, because now she didn't have to fear the darkness. And this light preceded her all the way home, illuminating every step of the way. When she got to the farm, she awakened one of her sons to help unhitch the horses. Next day, the son came downstairs expecting to find the stranger who had held the light, but there was nobody present. Laura never wavered in her belief it was God himself who held the light. And it's easy to understand why a religious person might interpret such a light as emanating from God. And the circumstances of the 2 experiences just related resemble the accounts of saintly signs and visions. If Flora and Laura had experiences in the Middle Ages, there would have been no doubt in anybody's mind as to the source of the light. Science and technology demand that we state these occurrences in scientific and technological terms, even as the religious hierarchy would have demanded they be interpreted theologically in this period of domination. But the purpose of our discussion is not to make historical or sociological judgments on either phenomenal thought, but simply to point out that we use the words of the predominant discipline of the day. And who's to say that we're not describing the same phenomenon cloaked in the acceptable fashion of the times? Maybe after we've successfully moved through church-oriented explanations and scientific-oriented explanations, we might discover the kernel of truth in each one and manage to come closer to the actual meaning of these phenomena. Now, there's another way of interpreting these events, and that's psychically or spiritually. Ectoplasm is described as being a greenish yellow substance that rises from the body after death like a vapor. It's not mortal and not bound by the earth plane. When the body's in its inhabited dies, it's released and have completed its earthly mission. It's free to take its original place in the universe. There's a discussion in Life magazine, March 9, 1962, that goes into some detail about ectoplasm, written by Lieutenant Colonel John Glenn shortly after his epic solo orbit of the Earth. So did he actually see ectoplasm? Do these strange greenish yellow lights have anything in common with Spookville's ghost light? Or Flora Shaw's illuminated backyard? Or the blue fireballs of Joliet? Or even the shafts of light that so terrorized Mary Inez and her mother? The question becomes, are we dealing with separate phenomena in different fields of religion? Or are we dealing with the same phenomena dressed up in the specific nomenclature of these various disciplines? Will we ever know who or what pulls the strings to make these flickering lights dance on the earth? In all likelihood, probably not. On that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow. And once again, if you're listening to Ken Hudnall, the Ken Hudnall Show. Until then, have a truly great evening.